Yeah, well, a lot of other products came before us, unfortunately, but I'm glad that we finally come to the point now where I think by about Chinese New Year, they seem to be saying today, which is obviously one of the prime times for Southern Rock Lobster, that we're going to be back in through the front door and back to the live trade agreement that we did once have before we sort of got into the COVID kind of era.
Take me back to that time when you had an FTA around that 2020 when the bans were put in place. How did it impact not just your business, but all the wraparound businesses that go along with being able to export these exports, these lobsters to overseas?
Well, it's the fishing in Australia is a lot of them is still done by family businesses. So for Port Macdonald, for example, majority of the boats that leave from Port Macdonald and go and fish every day are based as small family businesses. So, we have a fleet of over 40 boats that leave each morning from here, go and catch the Southern Rock Lobster and bring it back to us. And then we then distribute it, obviously, when we had the free trade agreement to China. But since then, we've had to look for new markets and work out whether we're going back into Europe or whether we go to other Asian countries like Malaysia and Singapore and Taiwan. But one of the only positives is that we've been able to get a little bit back into South Australian/Australian supermarkets in the form of cooked frozen or raw halves and things like that. So there's been a bit back into the Australian market, into supermarkets, etc. But there's been quite a negative effect on a lot of businesses surrounding our business because we have suppliers for packaging, we have freight companies, we have our business ourselves because we have one in three different businesses in South Australia that all do different zones of Southern Rock Lobster. So we have had a pretty bad time since the free trade agreement ended.
Yeah, can you put a number on what it cost your business?
Well, the immediate effect was that the price of lobster nearly halved to what we were giving these fishing families, which meant that if the price halved and the demand was down and it was harder to move it, all of a sudden we had to start processing it in different ways. The cost went up for us to process it. The cost went down for the producers and the fishermen, the primary producers, to source it for us. And so all in all, it would have been over half of our costings. It would have gone up. Every single cost we had went up and the sales went down. And we ended up with situations where we had lots of live lobster in tanks in factories and nothing to do with them or nowhere to send them. And we had to sit on them and we were we couldn't find a home for them. We eventually did, but at a bit of a loss, unfortunately.
I mean, there was that time, a couple of Christmases ago, where you saw lobsters at the fish markets for, as you said, extremely less expensive prices than they once might have been. Tell me about switching the business back on. Is it as simple as flicking a switch, getting the exports back up and running, or is there a lot more associated with getting the business going again?
There's a lot more associated with it because going back into the original, mainly China market, which is 95% of what we were doing, means that we need to undo some of the work that we have done in the domestic market and other countries. So we don't want to cut all of the work we've done over this last 4 years or 5 years. So we weren't just stop and start doing everything back into China. But I think it'll be a gradual easing, like a gradual transition back into China being probably still one of the main purchasers of Southern Rock Lobster, because that's where the highest price is achieved. But I still hope to keep our domestic markets and our other markets around the globe now. So we don't want to let any of the others down that we've just created new markets with.
Do you think, though, that one of the unintended consequences here is that Australians will now start paying more for their lobsters now that the ban has been lifted so exporters can send their lobster over to China?
Well, I think until the end of this season, I think Australians will be looking pretty good if they look in the supermarkets, because we've already this season put a number of Southern Rock Lobster from South Australia and even Port Macdonald into some of the IGAs and Foodlands and the local supermarkets. So I think you'll be right this year.
Okay. And Tom, just finally before we go, will you be celebrating tonight with your colleagues and the fisheries and everyone that works in the industry?
Well, down in Port Macdonald, there's a huge amount of fishermen here, and I think it'll be safe to say that we might have a beer or two.